Thank you. So my name is Joseph Gerson. I'm with the International Peace Bureau and the Campaign for Peace, Disarming, and Common Security. And I want to welcome those of you who are here with us and those who will be joining us online when we share the recording of today's session. I will also want to thank and introduce Evelyn Rubino, who is going to be co-chairing, and Mary Fernandez, who is taking care of our videotaping and other techniques. So here in the UN, people speak in diplomatic terms, but I'm more inclined to plain speaking about our increasingly urgent dangers of this moment. We are involved in two very dangerous Cold Wars. The Trump administration has pitched the United States and much of the world into a free fall. And we're watching what may be the U.S. and China sleepwalking into what could become a cataclysmic nuclear war. And then there is more. India and Pakistan, as we meet, are on the verge of a major war that could go nuclear. Unlike the past, China may be the only power that could mediate the conflict and prevent escalating war. The Gaza genocide is proceeding unchecked, with starvation now a primary Israeli weapon. It is like watching the destruction of the Warsaw Ghetto in slow motion. We can hope that the U.S.-Iran negotiations will bear fruit, but we also need to bear in mind that on the day that Trump threatened to bomb Iran, the Pentagon also displayed its new B-6113 nuclear bunker buster bomb. Not exactly subtle. The final outcome of the Ukraine war, in which Russia has used its nuclear arsenal in the tradition of the United States as an ultimate threat, remains uncertain. In the face of Trump's increasing disengagement from Europe, Poland and several other European nations have signaled their interest in the French nuclear umbrella to deter possible future Russian threats. The majority of South Koreans now favor the nation becoming a nuclear power, and with uncertainty about Trump, despite its peace constitution, there are similar stirrings in Japan, where their military for the past 60 years has asserted that it has the right to possess tactical nuclear weapons, that it's simply a right they've yet to exercise. Not a pretty picture for this and future generations. We are reminded about the power of the people and what a small number of committed people can achieve this past December in Oslo, when the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to Nihon Hidankyo, the Japan Confederation of A&H Bomb Sufferers Organizations. Over the years, our popular movements have made important arms control and disarmament agreements and initiatives possible. Over the years, our movements have made important victories, and once again, as limited as we are called to follow with the courage and imagination of the Hibakusha and our other friends who have won important disarmament victories. Among them, the test bans, SALT treaties, the INF, and New START, the TPNW, the nuclear weapons-free zones across much of the planet, and the end of the First Cold War. I will confess that this event has gone through several iterations. We initially expected to have Jeremy Corbyn with us. He, in the end, did not travel to the United States, but I have a statement from him, which I will read shortly. And we had also hoped to have Sharon Dalev from Israel and the Middle East Treaty Organization, but she unfortunately can't be with us. So with that introduction and kind of under the weight of the responsibility that we have in these times, let me turn to begin. Actually, let me do my folder here. Have a second. Oops. Supposed to have all your papers in place. That was appropriately awkward. So in terms of our speakers, after I read Jeremy's statement, we'll begin with Yayoi Tsuchida, here to my left. Yayoi is the Assistant Secretary General of Getsukyo, the Japan Council Against A&H Bombs. She's an indefatigable campaigner for nuclear weapons abolition and holding the Japanese government to account. And we were last together in Oslo at the time of the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony. Following Yayoi, Marco Marzo, who's to my right here, Professor Marzo, will be speaking. He is the current Secretary General of the Brazilian-Argentine Agency for Accounting and Control of Nuclear Materials, where he directs implementation of nuclear safeguards in Argentina and Brazil. His expertise is as a professor of nuclear materials, accounting, and control with postgraduate nuclear engineering program at the Polytechnic School at the University of Sao Paulo. He also contributed to Britain's nuclear security culture program and is an advisory board member from 2018 to 2022. Reading his bio here, I was a little bit surprised and happy to see that he also spent time in my home state of Massachusetts, where he was a professor at the University of Massachusetts in Lowell. And our final speaker will be John Burroughs. John is the former executive director of the Lawyers Committee on Nuclear Policy. He's now the senior policy analyst for them. He represents LCNP in nuclear non-proliferation treaty meetings at the UN. He's the author of The Legality of the Threat of Use of Nuclear Weapons, a guide to historic opinion of the International Court of Justice in 1998, and co-editor of Nuclear Disorder or Cooperative Security, 2007. And his articles have appeared in publications including the Fordham International Law Review, Bulletin Atomic Scientist, Arms Control Day, and others. So we have if you will, interesting and diverse, use that word, the more we use that word these days, the better, diverse panel, who I think can help to point the way toward what we need to do in this time. Let me then turn to read Jeremy's statement, which I received about 10 minutes ago. I'm sorry not to have been able to get, I'm very sorry not to be able to be with you this afternoon. Please accept my solidarity greetings to you all from Britain. We come together at a critical time to discuss some way out of here, indeed. The atrocities being carried out by nuclear-armed Israel against the Palestinian people in Gaza must be brought to an end. This ongoing catastrophe has the potential to engulf the entire nation. The conflict in Ukraine continues with a huge drive in militarism across Europe. Never has the movement for global peace and nuclear disarmament been more urgent. With Trump in the White House and his track record of trashed international disarmament agreements, we need to strengthen and renew arms control treaties. That means lobbying for a renewed START treaty, defending the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. It also means extending the nuclear weapons-free zone to the Middle East. Governments like Britain are only making the world more dangerous. It is whipping up international tensions to justify obscene levels of military spending. It is actively supporting nuclear-armed Israel and its genocide against the Palestinian people, and it is driving nuclear proliferation through its involvement with the AUKUS treaty. It's been interesting to hear the many references to AUKUS during yesterday and today's sessions. But there is growing opposition to this war drive and the huge attack on living standards that accompanies it. The peace and anti-war movement in Britain is strengthening links with the anti-austerity and climate movements to pressure the government to change direction and meet its international obligations on nuclear disarmament, climate action, and global justice. In this 80th anniversary of the U.S. atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we need to shine a spotlight on the human cost of nuclear war so that the world comes together to say no more Hiroshimas. As history has shown, it is pressure of public protest that has forced political leaders to step back from the nuclear brink. Let's redouble our efforts for global cooperation and to ensure that we have a future to look forward to together. From Jeremy Corbett. So with that, maybe then to segue immediately then to Yayoi Tsuchida, who is deeply involved in organizing commemorations and conferences and pressure around the 80th anniversary of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings. Yayoi.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak before you. Since the US President Trump took office, the world seems to be falling into confusion. In Japan too, the TV is abuzz with his news every day. The Japanese people also feel uneasy how the government will respond to Trump's demands to increase tariff and the so-called cordial budget for the US military stationed in Japan. But we are not hopeless. In spite of his sensational way of doing, everything Trump has said has not been as desired. Instead, he is deepening the contradictions with many governments and the people and isolating the US. It is also encouraging that more than 3 million people have risen up to protest him at about 1,400 places in 50 states in the US. Here is not a world where Putin and Trump have their way. I also admire that many of you are playing an important role in such a surge of the people's protest. In Asia, the people of South Korea stood up against the attempted martial law by President Yoon Suk-yeol to unseat him. I was moved to see citizens and young people staying up late in front of the parliament. It is a victory for democracy, I think. We movement in Japan condemn the barbaric acts of Russia, the US, and others violating the UN Charter and international law. They should be stopped immediately. All nations should act in accordance with the international rules of peace. Above all, we demand that these countries, as permanent members of the UN Security Council, fulfill their own mission to maintain international peace and security. In this regard, the third meeting of state parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons showed that the TPNW was a beacon of hope in today's turbulent situation. Although there was no participation of NATO member states as observers, reflecting the difficult situation of the world, the political declaration adopted on the final day clearly condemned the use or threat of use of nuclear weapons and expressed unwavering commitment to the abolition of nuclear weapons. The declaration further states that the stream of the TPNW has played an important role in promoting diplomacy and strengthening multilateralism against rampant violation of the UN Charter and international law. As the Thai government stated in its remarks, the TPNW has become more than just a treaty, indicating that it has gone into the mainstream for achieving a peaceful and just world free of nuclear weapons. The joint efforts of the United Nations, governments and civil society around the TPNW and the movement for nuclear abolition are playing an increasingly important role in the restoration and strengthening of the world order based on the UN Charter. The role of civil society is crucial. This was keenly felt at the third meeting. I thought that the campaign to have its own government join the treaty should be developed drastically in each country, as the elimination of nuclear weapons is an urgent task. If the Japanese government had participated in the third meeting as an observer, the atmosphere and momentum of the meeting would have been completely different. The Japanese government, despite being the able-armed nation, has turned its back on the TPNW, adhering to nuclear deterrence and being complicit in the US nuclear strategy. The Nobel Peace Prize awarded to Nihon Dankyo was greatly celebrated as new hope at the third meeting. But the Ishiba government has taken cold attitude to the Hibakusha, ignoring their desire for it to take the lead in elimination of nuclear weapons. Also, we are so ashamed and angry at his promise to Trump made at the Japan-US summit meeting, which makes Japan be on the front lines in the event of an emergency in the Taiwan Strait. The joint command system between the self-defense forces and the US military is being strengthened. More and more arms and fighters are being bought from the US, and military spending is being increased to double or triple. Prime Minister Ishiba says that tomorrow's Ukraine is East Asia, and he is considering nuclear sharing with the US to establish Asia version of NATO. In subordination to the US and ignoring the constitution and diplomacy, the Japanese government has been moving forward to make Japan a war-fighting country. This way of doing it, military to military and nuclear to nuclear, only intensifies division, confrontation, and tension in East Asia, and raising the risk of war, even nuclear war, in this region. In order to change such a government policy, we have been carrying out a nuclear-free Japan campaign aimed to help the government join the TPNW. We believe this is the way to contribute to advance the elimination of nuclear weapons in the world and bring about a shift to Japan's security policy and to contribute to the realization of a nuclear-free and peaceful East Asia. The campaign has 3 pillars of actions, including informing the public of the inhumanity of nuclear weapons through the Hibakusha's testimonies and airborne photo exhibitions, collecting signatures from the public and urging local governments to adopt resolutions calling on the government to join the treaty. The number of signatures has reached, the number of signatures collected has reached 3 million. Mainly, Hidankyo and Gensikyo have been collecting the signatures. And the municipalities that have adopted such resolutions have exceeded 40% of all local governments in Japan. Now in Japan, people's dissatisfaction with the government is increasing due to inflation, high prices, and hardships in living. And they don't trust the government. The support rate for the Ishiba government has dropped so quickly to 23.1%. In July, just before the 80th anniversary of the atomic bombing, we will have a national election, the House of Councillors election. We are going to strive for making peace, militarization, and nuclear weapons issues points of contention at the election and encouraging the people to choose such nuclear-free peaceful politics. At the third meeting of TPNW, Gensikyo called for worldwide actions of citizens for a nuclear weapon-free world towards the 80th anniversary of the atomic bombings and with a view to the 11th NPT Review Conference in 2026. These actions include to make creative and multiform actions to raise public awareness and urge the government in each country to join the TPNW, and to urge the governments of the nuclear weapon states as well as other nuclear powers to implement their declared obligation to achieve the complete elimination of their own nuclear arsenals, and thus achieving the peace and security of our world without nuclear weapons. We believe that to develop these actions are important, especially in nuclear weapon states and nuclear umbrella states. For this purpose, let's work with the Hibakusha to disseminate their able experiences and raise awareness about the inhumanity of nuclear weapons. Now we have the chance. The award of Nobel Peace Prize to the Hibakusha has given enormous potential to our movement, increasing people's interest in nuclear weapons issue and making it possible to reach out the wide strata of people, including prominent people and politicians. Let's reach out to all people and all countries with the Hibakusha's testimonies. In Japan, we are asking local government to hold gatherings and meetings to invite the Hibakusha and to hear their stories. And many local governments agreed to do so. For example, like Aichi Prefecture, the governor decided to sponsor a peace gathering of prefecture people, inviting a Hibakusha, and let the participants hear the story of atomic bombing. And Aichi Prefecture government decided to allocate budget to this event. So such things are happening at many parts in Japan. We are going to do utmost effort to develop the nuclear-free peaceful Japan campaign drastically toward the 80th anniversary, and are determined to make the World Conference Against A and H bombs a rallying point of the peace movement of the world, and a springboard to advance the elimination of nuclear weapons by promoting cooperation with the UN, national and local governments of the world, and civil society. Please come to 80th anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and join such an exciting World Conference, which is held on August the 3rd to the 9th in both cities. Our next target is the NPT Review Conference in 2026. I want to propose peace movements of the world, especially the US movement, to jointly organize international New York action at the time of the review conference next year. We Japanese Hibakusha, their average age is 85 years old, and they say they cannot wait anymore. So, we Hibakusha and Japanese people cannot be silent anymore. We are very angry at outrages of nuclear powers, especially the US and Russia. So please consider our proposal and let's work together to create such a large-scale people's manifesto for a nuclear weapon-free and peaceful world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yayoi. Thank you. Your really comprehensive talk there. I think for people who are here and listening in will understand the important role of the Japanese movement. And your closing reminds us of the great responsibility that we have here in the United States. With that, I want to turn the floor over to Professor Marzo, who will be speaking, I think, in large measure about the Brazilian-Argentine Agency for Accounting and Control of Nuclear Materials. It's not widely known here in the United States, and I have to say, in the last several weeks, I've heard more references to it, and its role as a model for other countries and other parts of the world. So, Professor Marzo, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Well, thank you for the invitation. It's the first time I attended this meeting, and I'm very glad to be here. And well, I am a Brazilian. I'm a physicist, and in the 70s, there were the international community considered for proliferation hot spots in the world. First was India, Pakistan, the second the Korean Peninsula, the third Middle East, and the fourth was Argentina and Brazil. And Argentina and Brazil, the 70s and the early 80s, both countries were under a military regime, and both countries had domestic nuclear development, in particular enrichment process. And in 1983, Argentina declared was able to enrich uranium through the gas diffusion, and 2-3 years later, Brazil declared it could enrich uranium by gas centrifusion. And that means those countries in the 70s and 80s had many nuclear facilities outside of IAEA safeguards, international safeguards, for the domestic facility. Just to give an idea, we had both countries about 60 nuclear facilities, and maybe less than 20 under international safeguards. I prepared my PhD in counseling in Germany, and I remember the director of the Neutron Physics Institute, he used to say to the visitors, here's Mr. Marzo from Brazil. He's learning how to build a nuclear bomb to launch in Buenos Aires. This was more or less the mind at that time. And then I had the privilege to experience or to living a time that we could, how to say it, approach the two countries. I was when I came back from Germany to Brazil in 1981, and then in 1983 I was designated director of nuclear safeguards in Brazil. And well, we had a very, very weak contact with Argentina at that time. And but with the redemocratization of the two countries, the end of the 80s, the situation changed a lot. And then the two nations decided to, it was not gratis, because was a lot of external pressure and also a lot of internal pressure on the government to keep the utilization of nuclear energy only for peaceful purposes. And that was very interesting because from 1986 until 1988, Brazil prepared a new constitution after the military regime. And the Article 21st is very well established. All nuclear activities in Brazil are exclusively for peaceful purposes. And this was a motivation for the two countries to start meeting each other. And in 1985, the two countries decided to set up a nuclear policy committee, very comprehensive committee, led by a diplomat, but with the participation of academic and industry. That means it was very comprehensive. And this was the beginning of this rapprochement between the two countries. And in 1987, I had the privilege to be part of the first Brazilian technical delegation to visit the top secret diffusion enrichment facility in Argentina. Well, at that time we were very skeptical to get any agreement or any cooperation. But this was, in 1987 was the beginning of this ice break, because we prepared a lot of questions for this facility visit. But we said, no, they will not answer the questions for sure. Then three experts from Brazil. We went to the facility, well, a questionnaire, and the Argentinians responded to all the questions. And on top of that, they show us the most sensitive parts of the facility, even the factory of the diffusion barriers. The Brazilian authorities, we were very impressed with this situation. And then next year, the Argentinians visited the centrifuge enrichment facility in Brazil, and also they could get access and understand what Brazil was doing. And then we set up many working groups in specific areas, very specific radiological protection, safeguards, some safety issues also. And then started this exchange of academics, of technicians, and so on. And then in 1990 was the first Brazilian, after the democratization, was the first president elected by vote. And in Argentina also changed the government, and the two governments decided not only to increase the cooperation, as we did, but also to sign a formal agreement. This agreement was signed in July 1991 and ratified by the Congress of the two countries in December 1992. You know, in Argentina and Brazil, the Congress to approve an international agreement in less than 5 months, this is for the Guinness Book of the Record. Because normally they take 5-6 years to. This demonstrated the very big support of all the parties, many ideological wings. They support practically by consensus. And then they decided this bilateral agreement, created our organization, Brazilian-Argentine Agency for Account and Control of Nuclear Materials, and we started working in beginning of '92. And then by political decision, and I was appointed the first senior officer for planning and evaluation. I was not the secretary of ABAC, I was a planning and evaluation officer. But we decided to start applying safeguards in the facilities, in the domestic facilities, not under international safeguards. Because the other were the IAEA safeguards. But at the same time, in '91, Brazil, Argentina, and ABAC started to negotiate with the IAEA a quadripartite agreement. It's a comprehensive safeguards agreement with the IAEA that was signed in December '91 and entered into force about 3 years later. That means this was not anymore so fast, the international safeguards agreement with the IAEA. But and then when the IAEA when the quadripartite agreement entered. This is very curious. Normally, the country signed the NPT, and 180 days later has to have safeguards agreement in force. But in our case, it was the opposite. The first, we signed this comprehensive safeguards agreement, full scope safeguards agreement, and just years later, Argentina and Brazil joined the NPT. But then the IAEA started implementing its safeguards, full scope safeguards in end of '94. But the quadripartite agreement has many provisions establishing the coordination of activities between the two agencies. And we are working over 30 years together in good coordination. The IAEA we perform a joint inspection, ABAC and the IAEA, and we perform more inspections than the IAEA because we have to verify all imports and exports from Argentina and Brazil, and the IAEA does not verify imports and exports. Well, now is I would like to go now to the situation. You know, I have here some figures that I would like to share. I mean numbers. I want to share with you. But look at the situation today in relation to the IAEA safeguards. The IAEA safeguard, the IAEA is always complaining that they don't have enough money to apply safeguards. Because it's correct. I was director of Division of Operations at the IAEA for 7 years, 2008 until 2014. And I was director of Division Operations A, responsible to apply safeguards in Asia Pacific. That time we were applying safeguards in North Korea, and then they kicked us out. But look at this situation now. In terms of IAEA budget, they spend about 150 million US dollar in safeguards. But 30% of this money is expended in Euratom countries, 27 Euratom countries, Europa, and in Argentina and Brazil, the ABAC countries. That means that exactly the countries that have submitted, are under safeguards of the regional organization, the IAEA is spending most of the money in those countries. That means, okay, $150 million yearly is nothing, it's peanuts. Every second-class soccer team in Europa spend 5 times more. That's the correct. But it's incredible because the IAEA spend a lot of money in Euratom's country, in ABAC's country, and in even UK, France, India, that have already, China, have nuclear weapons. And then, now let's go to the conclusion of the COP28 in Dubai. 30 countries pledged to multiply by 3 the utilization of nuclear energy up to 30 years. 30 years. Look, if this really happened, 3 times more nuclear facility and nuclear material, the IAEA is not able to cover. That means that we are envisaging that the proliferation regime, the non-proliferation regime, will have many difficulties to comply with this situation. That means it's not only the quest of to use the current regional safeguards organization, but I think we have to think about to implement safeguards regional organization in Asia, in Middle East, in other areas of the world. And then finally, I would like to say that the lack of compromise with the disarmament, as the nuclear weapon states are doing over 50 years, this has a big impact also in non-proliferation. Because, for instance, Argentina and Brazil didn't join the additional protocol to the Comprehensive Safeguards Agreement. Is there any technical reason? No, there is no technical. It's just political, because the authorities say, look, we joined the NPT. We have a safeguards, Comprehensive Safeguards Agreement. We joined the CTBT. We are part of the nuclear suppliers group. We joined the regime of missile control. We signed the treaty ban nuclear weapon. We have all commitments, but the nuclear weapon states don't have any commitment. Then we will not sign the additional protocol, while the nuclear weapon states don't act seriously to reduce at least this we see here in this forum. The lack of progress in disarmament impact also the non-proliferation. Okay, thank you for the invitation. And let me say that ABAC is this bilateral organization. We are always ready to contribute not only to non-proliferation but also to disarmament.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you, Professor. So that was, really wonderful. I think for many of us here, it was the first time we learned in any depth about what had happened. I will say my daughter was adopted from Brazil years ago, and we have an Argentine activist who is here with us, so I actually rather appreciated that historical description as well.
I didn't talk about the technical area, but just very shortly, we have about 50 inspectors, safeguard inspectors from each county. The inspectors are indicated by the county, not by ABAC. And over the last 34 years, we performed more than 3,600 inspections. Presently, we have applied safeguards in 75 nuclear facilities, 50 in Argentina, 25 in Brazil.
So just to say, as you concluded by pointing to the hypocrisy of the nuclear powers, for many years now, the criticism has been that the double standard ultimately undermines non-proliferation. And in addition to the immediate threats that the nuclear powers exercise, the danger as we see at the moment in South Korea, for example, a breakout in the middle of that is very dangerous. I want to thank you. I want to thank the people at IDB who encouraged us to invite you, and look forward to working with you in the future. With that, I'm going to turn to John Burroughs. Among others, I have a memory of John sitting in the middle of the negotiations for the TPNW. And remember that he played a not insignificant role in its negotiation. And my hope was that John could give us a sort of, on one hand, some background about the treaty, but more to give us a sense of where it stands now. And as it in some ways seems to stall, what are some ways forward that people are considering? So, John, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Joseph. Well, first of all, I appreciated your introduction about the crises that the world is facing today. But I'm not really going to try to address those. In some ways, we have to keep doing our work,
Exactly.
even in the midst of crises. So the Treaty of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the TPNW, is a marvelous statement of the principles and goals that should guide the abolition of nuclear arms and their non-use and non-threat before and after the weapons are eliminated. Something that I know from my many years here in New York when I was executive director of Lawyers Committee on Nuclear Policy, attending many UN events, General Assembly, etc. Those principles and goals that are marvelously stated in the TPNW, they have been set out for decades in General Assembly resolutions and elsewhere. But one thing the TPNW has done, it's made them visible to the world. The TPNW is just like, it's like a 10-page treaty. It can be used as an educational document. Read this, you can see how nuclear weapons should be abolished and the reasons that they should be abolished. The how, actually, I'm going to talk about problems with the how part, but it's a marvelous explanation of why the weapons should be eliminated. So one important example of how the TPNW has highlighted an important point in international law concerns nuclear threats. The treaty prohibits threat as well as use of nuclear weapons. The first meeting of states parties held in June 2022, soon after Russia had backed its invasion of Ukraine with nuclear threats, adopted a declaration which, among other things, stated, quote, "We stress that any use or threat of use of nuclear weapons is a violation of international law, including the Charter of the United Nations. We condemn unequivocally any and all nuclear threats, whether they be explicit or implicit and irrespective of the circumstances," end of quote. Just a few months later, the G20, an intergovernmental forum including the world's major powers, meeting in Bali, Indonesia, adopted a declaration stating that, quote, "the threat or use of nuclear weapons is inadmissible." So this is an instance where TPNW states parties, it appears, it seems just by the timing of how this developed, influenced the way the world really was understanding the problem of nuclear threats. The second and third meetings of TPNW states parties have continued to condemn nuclear threats, with the declaration of the just held third meeting held in March, just a couple months ago, stated that nuclear threats violate the UN Charter and international humanitarian law or the law of armed conflict. This was an addition. It's actually a point that international lawyers are interested in. Do threats violate not only the UN Charter but also international humanitarian law? And TPNW states party said it does violate international humanitarian law. So with its scores of non-nuclear weapon states parties, the TPNW has strongly reinforced the obligation of non-acquisition of nuclear weapons found in the NPT and in regional nuclear weapon-free zone treaties. It's not insignificant, for example, that the fourth largest country in the world, Indonesia, has joined the treaty. Brazil, I think Argentina, but Brazil for sure, have joined. Another populous member is Nigeria. Perhaps one day it will have the largest population in the world. The TPNW has also added an important element not found in the NPT in regional nuclear weapon-free zones, and that is non-cooperation with reliance on nuclear weapons. This could be important for example in the case of the Philippines. In any confrontation or conflict between its ally, the United States, and China. So, at a minimum, nuclear armed states and their allies, as well as other states that have not joined the TPNW, should treat the TPNW with respect. They should recognize the contribution that it has made and is making to changing the paradigm on nuclear weapons. And they should cooperate with the TPNW where possible. Now, what about joining? What about nuclear armed states joining the TPNW? Well, let me say, first of all, I think probably everybody, at least in this room, knows there's nothing in the world right now indicating that nuclear armed states are interested in nuclear abolition or specifically joining the TPNW. But let's say there was such interest in nuclear abolition. The TPNW would not have to be the path that nuclear armed states and their allies took. Let me state that plainly. But if they did want to join the TPNW, there are ways that could happen. They could engage in verified reduction of nuclear arms, leading to zero, get to zero, and then join the TPNW, perhaps with additional institutional infrastructure connected to their verified reductions. So my organization, Lawyers Committee on Nuclear Policy, and other groups, the International Network of Engineers and Scientists Against Proliferation, the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, in the 1990s developed a model nuclear weapons convention, which is like the chemical weapons convention in some respects. It's a comprehensive treaty addressing all aspects of elimination of nuclear weapons, verification, enforcement, how nuclear power is handled, etc. So somebody who's interested in how the TPNW could contribute to nuclear disarmament should, look at the model convention and sort of see, well, what's in the model convention that you don't find in the TPNW. And it's a complicated subject I'm not going to go into in depth, but let me just mention a few points. The TPNW does not address nuclear weapons delivery systems. The provisions for verification in the TPNW are vague and rely upon an unspecified international authority. There are no provisions in the TPNW for enforcement or inducement of compliance. The TPNW has a withdrawal provision that's somewhat stronger than the NPT, but it still allows for withdrawal from the TPNW. Well, do you want that in a nuclear weapons-free world? No, I don't think you do. How could such things be addressed if nuclear armed states wanted to do so? Well, the TPNW provides in the text for protocols. So you could have a protocol that further develops the verification provisions, or a protocol that addressed delivery systems, or perhaps one that addressed enforcement and compliance. Also, as I already mentioned, nuclear armed states could go through a whole set of sort of institution and procedure building in the course of verified reduction that they might sort of bring with them if they join the TPNW. So it all could be done. Well, why am I going through this exercise? I think that people need to understand sort of the complexities that would be involved if somehow the TPNW was to be used for disarmament. But I say again that the TPNW is a marvelous statement of the principles and goals that should guide abolition. And they're also setting out to making some concrete contributions. And maybe I'll just mention those, and we can discuss them further if people want to. Well, the third meeting of states parties held a couple months ago. What really stood out to me, and Jackie and I have talked about it, is really quite a lot of energy among the NGOs and the governments, or at least some of the governments, and it's kind of inspiring. And I think there's also a sense that the TPNW enterprise is not limited narrowly to the treaty and its procedures. It's more like a larger enterprise, and I think the scientific advisory group tends to be taking that approach. So the scientific advisory group itself provided a 17-page update to its 2023 report. So I recommend
Friends. Japanese friends joining us.
Okay, great. So I recommend reading the 17-page update provided by the Scientific Advisory Group. This 15-member group has established a pilot network of scientists with 23 members. So they're trying to sort of widen their outreach. And a decision made at the TPNW meeting was that Mexico will lead a consultative process on renewal of the mandate of the group and its terms of reference at the first TPNW Review Conference, which will take place in late 2026. Now, second thing that stood out to me at the meeting of states parties was a report about a consultative process led by Austria, and in particular Alexander Clement of Austria, diplomat, on security concerns of nuclear weapon states in connection with nuclear armed states' reliance on nuclear weapons, so-called doctrine of nuclear deterrence. And Reaching Critical Will provides a good overview of that report in their rundown of the meeting of states parties that you can find on the Reaching Critical Will website. So, but in short, humanitarian consequences and risks of nuclear weapons are graver and more complex than previously understood, with many impacts on non-involved TPNW states around the world. So seeking to eliminate these risks is a responsibility of TPNW states. It's in their own interest to do so. And you won't be surprised, I think, that the report finds that nuclear deterrence theory carries many uncertainties. It makes unwarranted assumptions about stability, predictability, rationality. So this process is going to continue. They're going to be doing engagement and outreach in various international bodies. They're seeking to do further research on the complex long-term effects of use of nuclear weapons. The report itself is long and somewhat duplicative, and I won't go through some of its main points now beyond what I've already said, but I do want to offer one criticism is reliance on nuclear weapons comes in many forms. A very good example of this is Israel has nuclear weapons, but it's silent about them. It doesn't have these articulated doctrines of deterrence that you find with U.S. and Russia have essentially since the beginning. But a lot of the critique of reliance on nuclear weapons seems to be directed at what you find in the U.S.-Russian relationship, where you have large arsenals, you have articulated doctrines of deterrence and so on. So that is not the only scenario for use of nuclear weapons, that particular relationship. The last thing I'll mention about the meeting is that a working group led by Kazakhstan and Kiribati has been developing the concept of a trust fund. Such a fund is not referred to in the text of the treaty, but establishing a fund, and this will be a trust fund for victim assistance, victims of nuclear use and testing. No, not nuclear production, not nuclear mining, just those two things. Nuclear testing, nuclear explosive testing, or use of nuclear weapons, including the use by the U.S. against Japanese civilians in 1945. So such a fund is not referred to in the text of the treaty, but establishing a fund has significant support among states parties, partly because it would be one means of meeting their obligation under the text of the treaty to cooperate in victim assistance and environmental remediation. Trust funds are not a new thing. They operate in other treaty regimes. For example, landmines and cluster munitions. So the states parties meeting just held decided that the working group will engage in further development of the trust fund concept. And the aim is to establish, if feasible, a trust fund at the first review conference to be held late next year. So I won't, they've got some fairly complicated things to work out. I won't really try to go through them right now, but in general, first of all, they have to figure out where can the contributions come from? Only from states parties, or will they accept them from foundations? Will they accept them from states that aren't party to the treaty, including nuclear armed states? And obviously then there's the issue of who could receive grants from the fund. Would it be only states parties? Would entities such as international organizations and civil society organizations receive grants? And then there's also the problem in particular of who is a victim, which is kind of a complex scientific question, in part, medical scientific question. And what environmental remediation would be done? Because, environmental remediation can be extremely costly. It's like, you get to a certain point, is it really worthwhile to clean up this particular area? So there are issues like that as well. All right, I will stop there, Joseph.
Thank you, John. As many of us are involved in advocating for the TPNW, it's really helpful to have not only that background, but also to know where things stand and where some of the questions are. So that's very helpful. Just also note that the former head of the U.S. Strategic Command, General Butler, has described deterrence theory as absurd.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that needs to be a priority of our movements, is to go after deterrence theory. Again, just to remember that in 1973, Israel did use its nuclear weapons, Goldmeyer's threat to use chemical weapons in order to open the floodgates of U.S. Spare parts and weapons for its military during that war. Emily, do you want to take over at this point?
Sure. Thank you again to Yayoi, John, and Marco for your very insightful remarks. We are now going to open it up to Q&A. Not too many of us in this room, so if you have a question, I have a feeling we'll be able to get to it. But if anyone has one that they'd like to start us off with. Jack?
Thanks.
Can you identify yourself?
Yes, hi, Jackie Cabasa, Western States Legal Foundation. I have a question for Professor Marzo and one for Professor Burrows. So Professor Marzo, I was in Brazil, I guess it was 2010, so it's been a while now, but I spoke to the Brazilian committee of the Brazilian Senate about the NPT, which they did not really know about. So I learned something about Brazil's history and programs. And at that time, there were concerns that Brazil was developing long-range ballistic submarines, ballistic, anyway, which would require high enriched fuel, uranium, for reasons that were not entirely obvious, and that there were some concerns that Brazil was shielding some of its uranium enrichment facilities from safeguards, and these uranium enrichment facilities kind of resemble Iran's uranium enrichment facilities. So I've not kept up on that, so I just wondered how you would, if you could bring me up to date.
Let me explain. In relation to the naval propulsion for submarine, Brazil has a project since 1979, still under construction, but it is not high enriched uranium, it's low enriched uranium. And BAC and the DIA, we are discussing with the Brazilian authorities, because the quadripartite agreement in Article 13 is quite, it's not equivalent, but it's similar to the Article 14 of the full scope safeguards agreement under the DIA. But the country has to negotiate special procedures for the fuel used in the submarine. And we are negotiating with Brazil since February 2022. 3 years, about 3 years. We had already 6 or 7 negotiations round. Then this is related to the submarine, because I think the only 2 non-nuclear weapon states that are intended to get a nuclear submarine for nuclear propulsion is Australia and Brazil. Australia under the AUKUS project, and Brazil is more domestic, indigenous project. But it's for sure is low enriched uranium. Now this was in 2000. This situation was in 2002 or 2003. Was a discussion because Brazil had 2 demonstration plants, enrichment demonstration plant, and in 2002 they started constructing a commercial facility. Brazil claims it's a commercial facility, but actually is a kind of demonstration plant because it has only 100,000 SUs, separative work units per year. You can imagine the one Urenco, really commercial facility, has 3 million. It's commercial because they want to sell the uranium, enriched uranium, but it's very small. Okay, then Brazil decided to protect the centrifuge. They don't want the IA inspectors to have visual access to the centrifuge. But this was discussed from 2002 up to 2005, and then was resolved the question, even with support from DOE, from US DOE, because DOE provided some experts and technology because Brazil put a kind of panel to protect the centrifuge. And then with the technical project was to measure with the neutron detection and the gamma detection to demonstrate there is no undeclared UF6 cylinder beyond the panels. That was resolved. But maybe 2010 was still under many people were concerned about that, but this was resolved. Now, the nuclear submarine is a different situation because the special procedures, the arrangements for safeguards in this field, the IAEA, the agency, and ABAC, they have to be able to conclude about the non-diversion of the field. But Brazil has the right to protect the sensitive information. And Brazil doesn't want to say where is the nuclear submarine in certain time. Then, well, I would say that this will be very complicated negotiation. It is a very complicated matter, and I would say it's like to prepare an omelette without breaking the eggs.
Before we go to John, I just wonder if I can ask a follow-up question, which is what is the purpose or the function of Brazil's nuclear powered submarine? Why would it want to have it?
Well, good question. I am Brazilian, I have the same question. Now, seriously, the Navy, Brazilian Navy, Brazilian authorities, they say that Brazil has about 9,000 kilometers of coast. And they call now this, because you have the Amazon. Amazonas is the green Amazon. And now they say this region, coast is the green, blue Amazon. There's a lot of oil resources. Now, but many, I am not expert in nuclear submarine but they say that this would be for defense. But many experts say that Brazil does not need a submarine in order to defend the resource. Anyway, this is the discussion.
Thank you.
So, part two, Professor Burroughs.
Yes.
So, you did mention that the TPNW is not the only way, not the only route, wouldn't be the only route for nuclear armed states to negotiate the elimination of the nuclear arsenals. So I wonder if two things, I wonder if you have an opinion about how likely you think it would be that if the nuclear armed states decided to disarm, they would join the TPNW. And the second is if you could just elaborate a little bit more on what some of the other alternatives would be.
Well, you know, the most important question is, are they going to decide they want nuclear abolition? That's the most important question. You know, right now it does not appear likely that TPNW would be chosen as the path. You know, maybe it would be referred to positively in the preamble of a nuclear abolition, a future nuclear abolition treaty. One thing that TPNW proponents say that I find both intriguing but I'm not entirely convinced is that you're thinking wrongly about how nuclear abolition will be carried out because you're assuming, you know, like a skeptic who says, well, we're going to need XYZ provisions we're going to need, you know, a quasi-world government essentially in order to oversee the elimination of nuclear weapons. And proponents of the TPNW, some of them, will say you're thinking about this wrongly because you're assuming that nuclear weapons would still be valued. But if you assume that nuclear weapons have been devalued, then you can imagine a much more sort of cooperative approach to their elimination. Now, the other part of your question was how would the elimination of nuclear weapons be brought about if not through the TPNW? Perhaps we should have, another side event on that subject. It's easier for me to talk about the challenges. If you assume that Russia, China, and India are all in favor of negotiating elimination of nuclear weapons, that is not the end of the story. Because North Korea is very attached to its nuclear weapons. Pakistan is very attached to its nuclear weapons. Elements in Russia and China and the United States, even if there's the dominant policy is to negotiate the elimination of nuclear weapons, those elements will still be there in the background.
Israel also.
Throwing up obstacles. Israel's very attached to its nuclear weapons. But I suppose my answer would be you'd have to get the major world powers behind nuclear abolition. And then they would have to find a way through the UN or somehow to involve other states that rely on nuclear weapons in the process as well.
Are you saying that?
Yeah. So that,
No, after you.
yeah. So that's one thing that always comes up, right? It's always depending on whether or not the nuclear powers are going to be good actors. And it was in the last session here. It's in all the statements by all the governments in there. And it's something that's not happening. And I don't think any of us believe it'll happen. I think it's interesting what was brought up about what happened in Brazil and Argentina, well, not directly related to what I'm about to get to, but it shows the proactive nature of states kind of taking things into their own hands and leading things by example, in the absence of the kind of efficiency and efficacy that we demand and that we need. So that's one, I think, good proactive measure of what states can do. But I also would have to put it on the other states as well, the states that are partners and signatories to the treaty. How serious are they about pushing the policy and giving it some sort of mechanisms or teeth, or using their negotiating power and ability to its full extent, whether it's economic or political, to start holding the nuclear powers accountable in other ways and actually creating real leverage. Because it's convenient for them to point the finger always, but are they willing to lose anything? Are they willing to give up anything? And I think, I'm not saying it's a great example, but we're looking at the trade wars going on right now, right? And it's something new, it's something different, it's something shocking and startling, but it's forcing us to look at things in new ways and how negotiation happens. There's new realignment, but it's not necessarily, there are realignments, and I think it is a positive thing that the non-aligned states have the opportunity to come together in these forums to meet once a year, twice a year, and it's building new alignments, but then we're also seeing other alignments happening, right? Other things happening globally, like the BRICS alignment. It's not necessarily around nuclear alignment, because they're still aligning with nuclear states, but there are changes to how the global dominance of power is being configured, and that there is not just a mono power dictating things. So I think that's what I want to get to and ask: are there things that have been done that are interesting, whether or not they've been effective, in terms of creating new mechanisms for leverage on a more bilateral, unilateral, or multi-pronged kind of coalition basis that you're aware of, outside of the treaties, outside of the NPT or it could be an NPT party state or member state or a TPNW member state, but are there interesting negotiations and leveraging going on?
Well, the others can answer this question too, but in short, not that I'm aware of, former U.S. diplomat sat more or less where I am right now the other day. Well, it was Thomas Countryman, and he said he's not aware of, like, the leaders of other countries raising nuclear disarmament in personal conversations with the U.S. president. He said that's a minimal form of what we're talking about, and it's not happening.
So I would just say that maybe it's not necessarily a national priority for any of those countries if they're not doing these things.
That was his point.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, so anytime we talk about the states parties, then it rises to the level of the political. And I'm less sanguine about political solutions to this. TPNW notwithstanding, I'm a big fan of the TPNW in the process. I think that we have a major issue just looking at, will the New START treaty be recalibrated or extended? That, I think, is right before us. And my question is, can civil society move our governance class to move Trump to actually engage in negotiations around the recalibration of New START? It seems to me that civil society has a role to play in this. And I hear too little about the role of civil society, our actions notwithstanding, about the prowess of civil society in moving our politicians to move the issue. I think that the political and humanitarian arguments have less sway than the economic arguments. If Trump and his admonitions to the Chinese and the Russians in Davos have said, hey, listen, maybe we shouldn't be spending all this money, I think that should be our call to action as civil society to actually move the economic agenda rather than just the political agenda.
Well, sorry I have to leave, but it was a pleasure to participate in this event. I hope next time I can stay longer.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. We look forward to next time.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You want to respond? I'll say this. I think here in the United States at the moment, you remember Buffy St. Marie used to sing about big wheel, turn around and around, little wheel, spin and spin. At the moment, I think we're largely caught up in the big wheel, in the fight against dictatorship and what it means for all of us living in this country, and then obviously its impact on the world. And within that, we also have to find ways to struggle forward. And I think for the moment, the civil society struggle against dictatorship is taking most of the oxygen. And I think that in turn leads us to have to find ways to work within that big circle. So for example, when we turned out thousands of people in Boston on April the 5th, many of us took banners and others for peace, even criticizing NATO, which was not part of the hands off NATO, which was part of the fall. My sense is that I'm part of a track 2 process in which I've been listening to some fairly senior figures from Russia, the United States, and Europe. And what I'm hearing is that with so little time between now and February 2026, there's zero chance that a new treaty can be negotiated. And the trick is whether or not, despite the terms of the New START, which says it expires, period, after one extension, as Thomas Countryman was saying here the other day, with a single sentence agreement between the United States and Russia, it could be extended. And you know, I think civil society pressure, to the degree we exercise it, needs to happen. Who has access to Trump or Putin at the moment is yet another question, right? But I think we also need to be aware that a series of very secret negotiations are taking place between Trump's people and Putin's people. To the degree, sorry?
Concerning what?
Well, ostensibly it's about Ukraine, but I think more it's about the standard deal, or the fundamental deal between the United States and Russia.
Okay.
And within that context, you know, Trump has raised criticism or questions about U.S. nuclear policy. One doesn't want to say nice things about Trump, but you know, there are a few raised or things we can maybe grasp. And so in this context, to the degree that we can raise it with letters to the editor, pushing to members of Congress as we can, to say, for God's sakes, you know, sign that one sentence agreement to extend to the start, and engage in serious negotiations about what a security, or I would say common security architecture would look like. I mean, I think that's got to be our demand. But you know, I think the other piece, I'd call people's attention to Richard Sacklow's analysis. He did a recent book talk with Quincy Institute, and he has a new book called The Culture of the Second Cold War. I have some differences with what he's written in his book, but I think it's very important in terms of naming where we are now into the third decade of the 21st century. The world has fundamentally changed with new alignments, and of course my biggest fear is actually the U.S.-China confrontation, and at the moment, what's going to happen with India and Pakistan.
What's the book?
It's called The Culture of the New Cold War. It's dense.
Thank you for that recommendation, Joseph. Do we have any other questions? Yeah.
Do we have time?
Yeah.
So getting back to Kinsheko, is there anything, well, and in terms of how we can, I think was the first President Bush, right, Senior, just got rid of a whole line of nuclear weapons, signed a pen, no treaty, no nothing. So things can happen that way. That's great. Don't expect any of that. Great panel, by the way, thank you very much. But in terms of Kinsheko, you invited us to come there, but I've always said, would it do any good for activists such as myself to go to Japan? Would it really help you? I would come if you thought, I would love to come if you thought that your government might listen to a U.S. citizen say, stop supporting my country in its nuclear, you know, maybe that would help. If you think so, I'd run to Japan and speak to anyone I could there. But yeah, right now, I'd like to extend an invitation to you and to everyone here to our nuclear deterrence summit in D.C. that we hold every year. I would love it if we had some hibakusha, the relatives, to come to Washington, D.C. for a 3-day summit where our DOD, our DOE, our Pentagon, all the contractors, for 3 days, the money's flowing, our nuclear weapons, you talked about money. The money is flowing to our nuclear weapons. It'd be great if we had 200 people from Japan standing outside this hotel in D.C. saying, kind of stop this, please. Instead of just 3 activists with a sign. Would you consider that kind of action coming to the United States to ask us to stop our nuclear weapon building and stop trying to protect Japan with our nuclear weapons? But anyway, so I'm rambling here. Yeah. So 2 things. would it do really any good for me to go there to speak to the government? And would you, as a group, consider coming to the United States? And instead of coming to the UN, where everyone understands you, hears you, and listens to you, to go to a place that they don't know anything about a treaty, they don't care about a treaty, and the money's flowing. So, just.
You know, after Nihon Hidankyo got the Nobel Peace Prize, the leaders of Hidankyo, publicly announced that they will make more effort to send hibakusha anywhere in the world to tell their stories and to appeal that humanity cannot coexist with nuclear weapons. So at the request from the movement in Spain and France, Gensikyo sent a delegation with hibakusha to France and Spain. And Spain is, as you know, the nuclear umbrella state. And France is a nuclear possessing country. So the power or the influence of Nobel Peace Prize was enormous. So many people took part in the gatherings. And the Spanish, the first of Spain was the 60 organizations get together to urge the Spanish government to join the treaty by raising awareness about the humanity of nuclear weapons. And they were surprised that so many people, citizens, took part in the meetings to listen to the hibakusha's testimonies. For example, in the small city of Zaragoza, they used a big hall, like 350 people could be accommodated. But more 100 people came and they couldn't enter the hall, and they returned, and they put a message to internet or to website or etc. They wanted to hear the story of hibakusha. So perhaps partly because of hibakusha's visit to Spain, that House of Representatives in Spain, started discussion about TPNW, and the minister of the right to social justice, he promised to put more, influence in the government parties of Spain. He's a minister, but from the minority of the ruling parties. So he promised, to work more for the TPNW. And in France, the situation was a little bit different. We had a major press conference in Paris, but no major newspaper came. But in Spain, all major papers came and carried out the interview with the hibakusha. But we realized that people and the local governments in France, their idea was different. They want the elimination of nuclear weapons. So many local governments invited us, hibakusha, and welcomed us, and the local government sponsored meetings, to hear the story of Hibakusha. So of course, we are thinking to send some Hibakusha to the U.S. Many places in the U.S. Hibakusha is going to hold an album exhibition in the UN next year around the time of the NPT Review Conference. But I myself think it is not enough. So, if possible, we want to organize a Hibakusha tour in the U.S. So please.
Anthony, I'll be glad to facilitate communication.
Fantastic, thank you.
Great. Any other questions? Well, then I think we can probably begin to wrap up. Thank you again so much, everyone, for being here today, and to Joseph for leading the way and sharing this session with me. And thank you again to our wonderful speakers, Marco, who had to leave early, and Yayoi and John. I really appreciate everyone being here today. And to Mariana, of course, for documenting and for her overall support always. So thank you again, everyone, for being here.
Thank you.